The Muskogee Nation's Supreme Court says the tribe's 1866 treaty with the United States required all freed slaves to be incorporated into tribes with equal rights, and says denying their descendants citizenship breaks that treaty. The Muskogee Nation initially denied the two plaintiffs citizenship in 2019 because they said they couldn't trace their family history to the blood roll. A tribal judge ruled in 2023 that the Citizenship Board broke the law and should have given them tribal status because of their family history on the Creek-Freedman roll. The Citizenship Board appealed and asked for two justices to recuse themselves, which they did. Tribal leaders also passed a law allowing them to appoint special justices to fill in for the recused justices. But the Tribal Supreme Court struck that law down in April as unconstitutional, which let this freedman citizenship case finally proceed. And Lori, Tribal Supreme Court justices ruled today the tribal judge was correct in ruling all Creek freedmen descendants should be allowed citizenship within the tribe.
Hi, you're in class with Dr. T.
The relationship between indigenous peoples and African Americans is deeply complex, shaped by centuries of shared oppression, interwoven histories, and at times conflicting identities and interests. The Muskogee Creek Nation's recent Supreme Court decision to grant citizenship to descendants of freed men, Black people, once enslaved by the tribe, offers a moment of reconciliation, but it also brings into sharp relief a long and painful history of anti-Blackness within some indigenous communities, alongside moments of solidarity and alliance. Slavery within the five civilized tribes, the Muskogee, Creek, Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole nations, collectively known as the five civilized tribes, were pressured by U.S. expansionism to adopt many European American practices in the 18th and 19th centuries, including chattel slavery. Some elite tribal members enslaved Black people for labor and status. After the Civil War, the treaties of 1866 between the U.S. and these tribes required that freedmen be emancipated and granted tribal citizenship. Despite legal guarantees, descendants of freedmen, Black people once enslaved by Native nations, continue to face exclusion and discrimination within several tribes. For example, Seminole freedmen who were once allied with the Seminole in Florida, but because of white supremacist frameworks, are still denied full political rights and tribal benefits by the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. This in direct violation of the Treaty of 1866, signed between the U.S. government and the Seminole Nation after the Civil War. That treaty explicitly granted citizenship to all formerly enslaved individuals and their descendants. And other tribes, including the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Muskogee, also known as Creek Nations, freedmen descendants have also had to engage in decades-long legal battles to secure citizenship and access to resources already promised in the 1866 post-Civil War treaties. These treaties required each tribe to emancipate their enslaved population and to provide them with all the rights of Native citizens. Yet, tribal constitutions and membership rules adopted in the 20th century, especially those based on the Dawes Act, which classified individuals as either Indian by blood or freed men, have been used to exclude Black descendants. These quote-unquote blood quantum requirements and by quote-unquote racial blood standards serve as racial gatekeeping tools, replicating white supremacist structures inside communities that were themselves targeted by racial categorization and colonial violence. Despite this history of discrimination, African Americans, indigenous people have also built meaningful alliances. One thinks of the Maroon communities and intermarriage throughout the Southeast and into Florida, Black maroons or escaped slaves, right? Slaves who ran away, often intermarried with indigenous people, especially among the Seminoles. These communities fought together in the Seminole Wars, resisting U.S. expansion and slavery, right? So there were moments in which indigenous and African people worked together. In the early 20th century, the U.S. government created the Dawes Rules to catalog tribal membership. People were categorized either as Indian by blood or freedmen, i.e. African-descended former slaves of tribal members. This racial bifurcation entrenched a legal and cultural divide. Many tribes later restricted citizenship to those listed by blood, excluding Black descendants from rights, representation, and resources. So you would only be a citizen if you had indigenous blood. You could trace your ancestors not as freedmen, but as indigenous folk. Even though Blacks and indigenous folk shared experiences of colonization, both groups have faced land theft. Both groups have faced cultural erasure. Both groups have been forced into white supremacist forms of assimilation. Both groups have fallen victim to pseudo-racial science and laws designed to devalue their humanity. For example, Seminole freedmen are still denied full political rights and tribal benefits. In other tribes, freedmen descendants have had to engage in long legal battles just to claim what was already guaranteed in the 1866 treaties, right? So there has been this history of anti-Blackness within these indigenous communities that because of a rhetoric of blood quantum and by blood citizenship. It's often been used to racially gatekeep and reinforce hierarchies that mirror white supremacist logics, despite indigenous people themselves having faced racial categorization and oppression. Despite these histories of discrimination, African Americans and indigenous people have also built meaningful alliances. Maroon communities and intermarriage throughout the Southeast and into Florida. Black Maroons escaped slaves. Black Maroons were escaped slaves, right? Runaways. They often intermarried with indigenous people, especially among the Seminoles. These communities fought together in the Seminole Wars, resisting U.S. expansion and slavery. Today, many activists and scholars from both communities, such as Tia Miles, Kyle Mays, and Kim Tolbeer, are working to build decolonial coalitions that recognize both the tensions, right? So when we don't want to erase history, we want to tell the truth. But we want to create solidarities between Blacks and indigenous people. Movements like Black Lives Matter and Land Black have also seen cross-racial support and dialogue. The Muscogee Nation's 25 ruling is historically significant. It affirms treaty obligations from 1866, highlighting indigenous sovereignty while also reckoning with tribal complicity in slavery. It rejects the racial blood standard, marking a step toward a more inclusive tribal citizenship based on community and historical ties, not pseudo-racial science, racial essentialism. In the recent decision, Rhonda Grayson says, while this statement honors our past, it also offers a meaningful opportunity for healing and reconciliation. It is important to hold two truths. Indigenous people have been victims of colonialism and genocide. Some indigenous communities have also perpetuated anti-Black racism, often under U.S. pressure and incentives to conform to settler norms. True solidarity requires acknowledging and repairing historical harm, while building alliances rooted in shared liberation, not racial gatekeeping, not pseudo-race science. Thank you. Please share, please comment, please like, and smash that bell. Very interested to knowing what you think about this ruling, and also how can different ethnic groups who have shared oppression or shared different experiences create solidarity. I'll be interested to hear your views on that. Thank you.